a great Barrington Candidates Forum. It's so nice to have you here. And it's so nice to be back in person, isn't it? Yeah. So round of applause if it's nice to be back in person. Unfortunately, we had to skip last year, and I think the previous year we were on Zoom. And while I am grateful for Zoom as an educator for allowing me to connect with my students, very much prefer to occupy a space. So it's very nice to be with you all, and very grateful that we could come here together today. So this Candidates Forum is sponsored by the newsletter, which, as the name suggests, is a monthly newsletter run by Eileen Mooney. She unfortunately couldn't be here today, but please reach out to her for more information about that. It's also sponsored by the Democratic and Republican town committees. So for more information about the Democratic town committee, please reach out to Michael Wise. For more information about the Republican town committee, please reach out to Buddy Atwood. I think did I get the affiliations right? If I got them switched, I'd get in trouble. I gotta watch out. To tell you a little bit about the format for tonight, so first and foremost, I want to do us all a favor. I think we can work together and do this and get out by 8 o'clock. So shooting for a 90-minute forum. But of course, if we do go a little bit over, that's okay too. I want to give you an opportunity to hear from each and every candidate. However, some of these races are uncontested. And for the uncontested races, I think we'll handle those first. We'll invite each candidate up to speak for 3 minutes and then give you an opportunity to ask questions, if any, to those candidates who are running uncontested. I'll go through all the races in the order that is presented by the newsletter. Some of the candidates weren't able to be here tonight, and in that case, I'll just briefly mention what the race is and who's running for it, and they couldn't make it. After that, we'll proceed to the two contested contests, and those contests are for library trustees, where we have 3 candidates for 2 positions, and a select board. We'll conclude the night with a select board, where we have 2 candidates for 1 position. And for the contested races, we'll have those folks sit at the table here, and we'll do brief introductions. They'll have a couple minutes to introduce themselves. And then I'd really like to allow the folks in attendance to take charge and ask questions of those candidates in the contested races. Of course, if things are a little slow, I can always step in and throw a question in there too. So any questions on the format of tonight's meeting? Yes. Yeah, so after we do the uncontested races, I'll invite all of the library candidates up to the table. You'll each have a chance to speak for 2 or 3 minutes to introduce yourself, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Thank you. And my name is Ken Knox. I live in West Stockbridge, so I don't have a dog in the fight for these contests. I work at Simon's Rock as a faculty in mathematics and associate dean of studies. It's very nice to see you all today. So let's begin with moderator. So we're electing 1 person for a 1-year term. The only candidate is Michael Wise. If you'd like to spend a couple minutes here at the mic.
I'll be brief. I won't even need my 3-minute timer, which I have in my pocket. This will be my 7th year, I think. I've done 10 meetings so far. Reviews have been generally good. I'm learning still. I'm open to suggestions about how we can do it better. I'm going to add 1 tiny wrinkle next week, but a larger wrinkle which I advertised in the newsletter I think I'm not going to add. We have a half a dozen items, maybe a dozen items, which come up every year. They're always adopted unanimously. Some towns do this all in one package, the so-called consent agenda. Move them all at once, vote them all at once. Explaining how to do that would take longer than doing it, because this town has figured out a drill. We can get through an article in about 90 seconds if we really want to. So I think that's what we're going to plan to do on the first on those items at the outset. I'm open to any questions and comments. No? I'm sorry to say that. John?
I haven't been able to go to town meeting since before you moderated the meeting. So, I want to ask you, the question I asked your predecessor, could you please tell people right at the beginning that a town meeting is a legislative body and not, you don't rush for the exits. You may not want to say that because it might alienate some voters, but a lot of people regard town meeting as opportunity to vote in slow motion, and that's not what it is. Your predecessor wouldn't do that. Maybe you persuade me to do it.
Point taken and understood. I agree with you entirely.
I heard that you do that now, but I don't know if that's accurate.
I thank you for your support.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. I appreciate that. And, you know, at Simon's Rock, we use first names, so if I'm calling you by your first name from time to time, I hope you'll forgive me. The next uncontested race that we'll cover after this is for Board of Health. We're electing one person for a 3-year term, and the only candidate is Dr. Ruby Chang. So, Dr. Chang, if you'd like to come up and take 3 minutes to introduce yourself.
It's a gorgeous day outside, and I really appreciate having everybody come in and listen. I'm not sure how to
This is not
try.
amplified, you're gonna have to project your voices. That's just for us. For the recording. For the TV station. You're gonna have to project your voices.
Can you hear me? Yes. All right. So thank you very much for coming in tonight. It's a gorgeous night. I had been on the Board of Health for about 6.5 years. And before that, I was, I had been a pediatrician at McAnee Pediatrics, which is in town, for about 10 years. I grew up in Taiwan, and there were exposures to tuberculosis and hepatitis B and hepatomas, as well as all kinds of infectious diseases. But I've also seen things that were done nowadays, which is composting, as well as collecting our food waste and giving it to the pig farmers. I was trained at Bay State, where I had exposure to children who have had meningitis, chickenpox, strep infection, babies who have died of sepsis. So I have seen over my 40 years of medicine everything that you could see in infectious disease, and I've also seen the effect of public health. I'm hoping that public health in this town is extension of Massachusetts Department of Public Health, as well as the Department of Environmental Protection. Public health encompasses quite a bit of different areas, including everyone's well-being and environmental causes. And I hope to continue that work with providing support for this town. I invite all kinds of conversations as well as questions so that we could help those decide on matters of their own personal interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Dr. Chang? Thank you. So the next committee is Finance Committee. And this is a contest where we have 2 openings and 2 candidates. One of those openings is for a 3-year term, the other opening is for a 1-year term. So we do have 2 candidates for 2 separate terms, neither of them being contested. Those 2 candidates, Ann O'Dwyer for the 3-year term and Richard Geiler for the 1-year term, unfortunately both were unable to make it tonight, but they did want to be here. So just letting you know about those 2 candidates. So after that, we have Housing Authority, where we're going to elect 1 person for a 5-year term, and that candidate is Philip Orenstein. And Philip wanted to let us know that he preferred to cede his time to other races that were contested, and therefore would not be attending tonight. So after that, we have planning boards and 2 positions, both of them 3-year terms, and the 2 candidates. First one is Malcolm Fick. So Mr. Fick, are you here tonight? Yeah. Good. So please, if you'd like to come up and take 3 minutes to introduce yourself.
Hi. I'd like to take a couple minutes and introduce myself. The microphone. The microphone that doesn't project. I'd like to take a couple minutes to talk about myself and maybe a little bit about what my goal would be for the next term for the planning board. About 12 years ago, I retired to Great Barrington, and we turned our part-time house into a full-time house, and discovered that moving from the city, I'm moving to a town that requires volunteers to run. And so in that time, I've spent 9 years on the planning board, in addition to 2 years as an associate. I am on the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission. I'm the vice chairman of BRPC. I have been the treasurer. I'm the executive committee. I'm on the environmental review committee, the regional issues committee for the BRPC. I'm chairman of the historical commission, where 11 years ago we published a smartphone walking tour. So if any of you want to get on your phones now and look in the stores and just search for Great Barrington, you'll see a smartphone historical walking tour that was published by the Historical Commission. And just this last year, we added another tour to that, the Du Bois Freedom Center tour, which was actually published and created by the Du Bois Freedom Center and is now added as part of the our Great Barrington walking tour. That's kind of what I've been doing since in my retirement. I've been doing everything except being retired. But I do have, we've done a lot. I'd just like to say that I think our planning board is a really good planning board. Looking at other planning boards, we have expertise on our planning board, engineers and architects, that other planning boards don't have. Engineers and architects tend not to be on planning boards because they have to appear before the planning board. But we're lucky the chairman of the planning board is a practicing engineer who works in New York, doesn't appear before Great Barrington Planning Board. We have 2 architects on the planning board, and that makes a big difference. One of the goals I'd have for this year is perhaps, and this is a wild idea, but perhaps taking a look at the master plan again, which was passed more than a dozen years ago, or about a dozen years ago. Believe it or not, when people come into the planning board, they're still referencing the master plan as an argument for doing their project. The master plan has stood the test of time, but I think right now it's starting to get a little stale, and it might stand refreshment. Taking a look at it, making sure the issues are current, taking a look at what's been done, what hasn't been done, and so on. So that's my crazy idea for this year. Any questions?
I don't think it's such a crazy idea.
Well, we'll see.
So, put it at the top of your agenda.
Yeah, I think it's time, but. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fick. The next candidate is Jonathan Henkin, who unfortunately won't be able to be here until about 7:30 p.m. tonight. So if we're able, we'll allow him to come up after we finish with the contested races and also introduce himself. I do want to thank CTSB, Community Television of the Southern Berkshires, for recording this event tonight. This is going to be recorded for broadcast on television and on the website. So thank you, everybody. And these microphones are for that recording, but for our room, for talking to each other, we'll need to use our teacher classroom voices. So appreciate you doing that. So our next contest is a Zoning Board of Appeals, and we've got 2 5-year terms coming up and 2 candidates, uncontested candidates for those terms. The first candidate is Peter Most. Are you here tonight? Perhaps not, and I apologize to Mr. Most in absentia if I'm mispronouncing your name, although it's great that you're not here to correct me. The second candidate is Michael Wise, so if you'd like to come up for a few minutes in the context of running for Zoning Board of Appeals.
30 seconds. Please vote for Peter. He's very, very good. He's our associate person running for office. He wants the job. Give it to him. I'm running for another term. I enjoy it as a lawyer. I've been on that board now for 10 years or so. I got onto it by accident. I was the victim of a write-in campaign no one told me about, and I've been on ever since. As I said in the newsletter, much of what we do is routine. I think that the zoning board could do better to help the people who have routine matters. Some of the stuff is not routine at all, and that's where Peter and I, retired lawyers, are having our fun. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you for that. So our next contest is for library trustees. So we have 2 3-year terms up for election, and I understand 3 candidates for that position. I will make one note. So those 3 candidates, and just reading their names, those 3 candidates are Mr. John Breasted, Ms. Sandy Pantorno, and Mr. Rob Schaefer. I understand that Ms. Pantorno couldn't make it tonight, but that Brandon Pantorno could make it tonight. And so Brandon will be reading a statement on Sandy's behalf, but will not be, of course, answering questions from the audience on the candidate's behalf. So I'd like to invite those 3 up to the table now. So I think if the candidates agree, we'll just begin as we did before by having each of you just introduce yourself for a couple minutes, and then we'll proceed with questions from the audience.
I have a logistical question.
Sure.
If you want me to project my voice, I'm supposed to speak into that mic where you are?
So those 2 table mics will pick up your voices for the recording.
No, but for the audience.
Yeah, so for the audience, unfortunately, there's no amplification. So it would only be your speaking voice.
Oh.
Yeah, which may be, is that?
It's adequate. It's adequate usually.
Okay, right.
But can that mic not be pulled off its knob?
Oh, this is for.
Even though we have the mic, there are no speakers in this room. So we could theoretically, if you had speakers.
Oh, I see.
but we don't have
Okay,
speakers.
I get it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So perhaps we'll start with Mr. Schaefer and then continue.
All right, my name is Rob. I come from a background of trade book publishing over the last 30 plus years, and for most of my adult life, I've been a volunteer at different libraries in whatever town we've lived in. And I think that I think that the libraries are the central kind of core place in a community, and that this library system in particular offers a tremendous amount of public programs that aren't necessarily related to books or to reading, and I think that's really, really important, and I want to be part of it, and I think it's a great community spirit, so that's it.
Okay.
All right, John, you're on.
My name is John Breasted. Can you hear me in the back of the room?
Yeah.
The first thing I want to say is not directly related to running for Library Board of Trustees, but I've had a lot of experience with 4-year-olds in supermarkets, and they all often ask their mother or father, usually mother, why is that man in that chair or that thing, Mommy? And so I know the 4-year-old in all of us has that curiosity. I don't walk because 56 years ago at the age of 19, I had a rather startling encounter while I was skiing with a tree, and it instantly paralyzed me for the rest of my life. That's just so you don't have to wonder about why I'm in the chair. I'm interested in serving on the Board of Library Trustees because initially no one else was running for it. And I thought, well, I haven't run for anything in this town for 12 years, since Board of Finance in 2011, and so I thought I might as well give it a try. I do happen to like libraries, and in my profile, Eileen Mooney's newsletter, I quoted the late Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. And he was famous for having said, taxes are the price we pay for civilization. And I can't think of a better example of that than free public libraries, which the United States of America was the first major country to do. To have tax-supported public libraries free of charge. So it's a board whose mission I can really get behind. My background is very eclectic. I've been a jack of all trades and a master of none, except perhaps the art of public complaint, which some of the Steve Bannon can witness that, and Ed Abrahams can too, because we haven't always agreed in public, and sometimes I've been a little too much in their face. So I've done a lot of different things for work, but my most recent work has been in this town. From 1995 to 2005, I tutored part-time at the Monument Mountain Regional High School in several different subjects, mostly chemistry, biology, math, and English. And then I decided to graduate to Simon's Rock College. That's what it was called then. I know I'm always supposed to pay obeisance to the name Bard now. So Bard College at Simon's Rock. And I tutored in some of those same subjects there from 2002.
30 seconds.
Okay, from 2002 to 2016. So I have not, I don't know the nuts and bolts of the financial and administrative support that the trustees offer the library system here, but I'm a relatively quick study, and I think it's something that I would feel content to support.
So I'm here on behalf of my wife, Sandy Pentorno, who's a candidate for library trustee. Sandy could not be here tonight, but prepared the following statement for me to read. Good evening, everyone. Sorry I could not be present for this Meet the Candidates forum. At the moment, I'm playing Florence Nightingale for my daughter, who is recovering from surgery in Florida. My husband and I bought land and had our home built in Great Barrington over 20 years ago, while I was still working as a high school English teacher on Long Island, New York, and my husband was working as a public library director. It wasn't until 2012, when we were both retired after 30-plus years in our respective careers, that we were able to make the Berkshires our permanent home and to live our dream. Why do I feel that libraries are special and that being a library board member is so important? If there is one place, besides a grandma's home, that can bring fond memories, I bet a library is that place for many of us. A library is safety and sanctuary. It is a building made of mortar and stone in which everyone is equal and accepted without judgment. In that way, it is a crucial democratic institution representing knowledge, learning, and inclusivity. I value those attributes. To me, the library was a place where my daughter, as a young teen, was able to walk to after school, read and do her homework as she waited for a ride home. It was also where our 3-year-old grandson enjoyed children's programs at Mason Library with Michelle, who reminded the little ones to kiss their brains for doing smart things. It was where my husband and I met friends new and old, thanks to the movies and book sales organized by the Friends of the Library. Most recently, the Mason Library has enabled me to embrace those attributes of knowledge, learning, and inclusivity by presenting 3 immensely qualified sculptors as they bring W.E.B. Du Bois, Great Barrington's native son, back home. As I conclude, I'd like to thank the library trustees and library staff for their time, effort, and continued dedication to our Mason and Ramsdale libraries during, during COVID. The challenges to staff and community were real. It was a tall order to keep everyone safe, but still maintain the important aspects of a community public library. So kudos to everyone for finding a way for us to borrow library items and attend library coordinated programs viewed via Zoom during a very difficult time. I am an advocate for a strong public library that values our communities. As a library trustee, I will work alongside the board, the director, and staff as we continue to expand our programs and resources, making them accessible to all our community residents, from infants to seniors alike.
Thank you to all 3 of the candidates for introducing themselves, and thank you for introducing Ms. Pentorno in her absence. So now I would like to open this up to the audience. This is your time if you have questions for these candidates. And the format that we'll use for that is perhaps please come up to the mic, speak your question clearly into the microphone so that it can be recorded, and then both candidates will have an opportunity to answer. So is there anyone who'd like to ask a question?
Good evening. My name is Michelle Lubert, 70 Division Street in Housatonic. So I'd like to ask the candidates, recently I've attended meetings where the tone of the meeting about the Ramsdale Library was disturbing. So as a resident of Housatonic, growing up there, although in some recent meetings that doesn't mean a lot, but I'm going to say that yes, I'm proud to say I grew up in Housatonic, know the Ramsdale well as the Mason Library. Our daughter practically grew up at both libraries. I would like to know from each of the candidates what their position is on the Ramsdale. Would you like to see it remain open and viable and active? and a community center for the village of Housatonic? Or are you of the frame of mind, we already have 2 libraries, let's shut one down? So I'd like to have an honest answer as to your feelings on it. And if maybe I can give you my email and Ms. Paterno can email me, because this is very important to me.
Well, I don't see how either of us could answer that we wanted to shut it down. I mean, it's been there for years, and I can't personally get in there in a wheelchair, as I couldn't in the Mason Library for the first 15 or 20 years I lived here. So I'm all in favor of accessibility, and I understand that is going forward. The money is available for that, and it's going to happen. Having not been in the library, I can't say what's in it. but I know the meaning is so meaningful to people, to you and others, Michelle, that I can't see how anybody in town would vote for shutting it down. That was your question.
Yes, because I've gotten that vibe from some during public meetings. And it's come up before, historically.
Yeah, I heard you talking on the Zoom meeting that I observed, that I attended remotely this past Wednesday evening, and you seem to have some issues with one of the retiring members of that board.
Well, she had issues with me.
Well,
What else is new?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the answer. Rob, would you like to answer?
My impression is that the board and the trustees are supporting keeping it open, and I certainly would like to see it open. Maybe it comes with a different purpose, and evolves, but I think it's such a beautiful building that it would be a shame for it not to continue to be open.
Okay, thank you. And like I said, I'll give you my email perhaps. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions for the candidates? Seeing none, oh, yeah, so please come.
I think one of the main concerns that we have, I'm Ruby Chang, and I'm on the library trustees, is book bans. And I would like to get your thoughts about what's happening in this country with book bans and what are your feelings about it?
Okay, well, I think that, again, coming from publishing, it's a conversation that it's a constant coming up with books. And the ALA, American Library Association, just introduced and posted a report of the number of contested titles, and they're considered unique. And in 2020, there are only about 225 contested projects nationwide, and they're unique. They're considered unique books. So Toni Morrison's Blue Aside, which is consistently one of the top 10 banned books, it only counts as once, even if it's all over the country. But it's now, this year, in 2022, it was over 2,500 unique contestants. And what's happening is it's not just the books, but there's a challenge of content, and it could be a challenge of an exhibition in a library. It can be a challenge on what the magazines are carried. And so it's not just books. And even though the books represent probably over 85% of the total, challenges, it's the libraries are being attacked, and it's going to happen everywhere. It's increasing, and I think it's something we can't be complacent about.
On the library, the town website, the library board's information section of the town website, there is a pretty lengthy document that our current library director urged the board to adopt. I haven't read it word for word, but I think she was a smart person to get that board to do this within a few weeks. after she assumed that position, and it seems that it's very strong, a very strong policy of the Board of Trustees for the libraries to be very vigilant and to push back a lot if that should happen in this town. I don't see that happening, likelihood of that happening in this part of Massachusetts. But there have been a lot of political things we've seen in the last 4 years, 6 years that no one expected would happen. But I think our librarian, Samara Klein, has been very proactive at that, on this issue. I was really startled to hear what Rob Schaefer said. I didn't know it had expanded so much in the last 2 years only. So let's hope that, with the title of that famous novel years ago, It Can't Happen Here, Sinclair Lewis or somebody like that. We shouldn't delude ourselves into thinking that book bans can't happen in progressive Great Barrington, but I think it's unlikely that they will. And we're prepared for it.
Excuse me, I would just like to respond very briefly because Sandy and I did discuss that, and she said that if the question does come up, she would like to just say very briefly that a community resident does have their opinion, has a right to their opinion. However, they do not have a right to voice their opinions on others.
There is a due process.
And there is a process, and I'm sure the public library does have policies and procedures to handle types of challenges to the book collection.
Thank you for that question. Further questions for these candidates? All right. Hearing none, we'll thank you all for your candidacy. And so I've been notified that Jonathan Hankin has arrived, planning board candidate. So Jonathan, if you'd like to come up and spend 3 minutes introducing yourself.
Where am I supposed to sit there?
No, just go to your name.
You can come up here into the microphone.
There you go.
Good evening. I'm Jonathan Hankin. If you don't know me, a little bit of quick history. I've done a lot of things in my life. Let's see. I was a hippie carpenter. I was a school teacher. It's way too hard to do it. I wasn't very good at it. I was in the Peace Corps as a photographer, and went to architecture school, became a licensed architect in California, worked on institutional projects, mainly like performing arts centers and museums. Got burned out on that, moved here in '95. In December of '97, Berkshire Bank gave me a house, and I had to cut it in half and move it. And Malcolm lives in it now. But that was how I started pissing people off in this town. So I've been doing it ever since. So now I'm a real estate broker, and I've been on the planning board since '97. I've served as a member, I've served as a chair, I've served as a vice chair, I'm currently the clerk. So I've done a lot of the planning board, and it's kind of my love of this town. So any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you. Okay.
So thank you for that. Our last contest of the night is for Select Board. And so we're electing one position. It's a 3-year term, and we have 2 candidates for that position. And those 2 candidates are Ben Elliott and Sharon Gregory. So I invite the candidates now to come to the table. So we'll follow a similar format, remembering that you have table microphones that will capture your voice but not amplify it. Let's take up to 3 minutes each to introduce ourselves, and then after that, we'll start with questions. So Ms. Gregory, if you'd like to go first, and then Ben.
Alphabetically, you should go first.
Well, reverse alphabetically this time.
Okay, thank you. Hi.
Keep you on your toes.
Thank you. Sharon Gregory. I have a long background because I started very early in my career. I'm a native Californian, 4th generation Chinese American, and I got my first job offer in New York right after I graduated on a plane ticket, so I've been on the East Coast since, and I love it. I've served in a lot of positions while I was in New York. I was in the front lines of the 70s movement of women in business. People don't even remember that, but, believe it or not, when I was the first woman financial analyst in IBM, they said when I was going to have my son, I would lose my benefits. And they didn't have a policy where you could continue your benefits as a pregnant woman. But we've come a long way since. I've also served on the board of the Children of Bellevue, the pediatric unit of Bellevue Hospital, president of the Wall Street Planning Group when Wall Street was going through deregulation. But I really missed the open spaces, and I bought a house here very early on, and I've loved it since. So I've spent more than 40 years. My adult years in the Berkshires, more than half of it in Great Barrington. And Great Barrington is where I want to stay. But I had a chance to get a lot of nonprofit and civic experience in both places. In Sheffield, I co-founded a number of nonprofit organizations, including the Sheffield Times and such. In Great Barrington, I worked at Iredale Mineral Cosmetics, and one of my projects was renovating Bryant School. So I learned a great deal about all the historic issues, the financing, state and city, town financial incentives. I served for 3 years on the town's finance committee, 2 years as chair. Early on, I spearheaded the expansion of the town center from 3 blocks to a mile. We did it through an ad hoc committee. Jenny Clark was among the people, but it took 2 years, and we prevailed, and I'm really proud of that. And I think this is where we get a lot of good feelings about being involved in volunteer work, and it's in my blood. I guess people say that complex problem solving is my middle name, and I try to apply that to all the school issues we've had. The town voted against the high school almost 10 years ago. It was slated to be a 700-person high school. Today, they say it would be 485 people if we did it as the 3-town district. And as a consolidated 8-town high school, it would be only 620. So I think, as disappointing as it was, I think the time is right. Great Barrington was being assessed for supporting the county's
30 seconds.
thank you, budget, and consolidating will help a great deal. I'm for it. I've been involved with the water issues, and I can answer more questions there, as well as a number of others. So I've been really active in civic affairs, and we know the issues very well, but the solutions are quite complex. I hope my experience will be applied to that in a very positive way. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ben?
Thank you. First of all, hi. Thank you all for being here tonight. For those of you who I haven't met before, my name is Ben Elliott. It's a pleasure to meet you. For those of you that I have met, it's a pleasure to see you. I'd like to start by talking about my history in this town. I grew up in Great Barrington. My dad grew up in Great Barrington. My grandparents and great-grandparents grew up in Great Barrington. 2 years ago, I was lucky enough that my wife and I were able to move back, buy our first house, and now my daughter gets to grow up in Great Barrington as well. But ever since I came back, I've learned just how hard it is to raise a family in Great Barrington today. And I know this issue is not new, right? This has been something that's been developing over the course of my life. It's a great place to be a kid. It's a great place when you're established or you're looking to retire. But we don't really focus on giving the right resources to that middle, to the people, to the young professionals and young families who I think are the backbone of our economy. If we don't come up with policies to retain this missing middle, I think we're going to suffer a labor crisis worse than the one that we're currently in. So I think it's the job of the board moving forward to take bold action to make sure that we're meeting the needs of this demographic. And I think it takes someone with lived experience to help set that agenda. I've gone to our schools. I've lived in this town as a renter, and I've now am a homeowner and a parent. I'm a resident of Housatonic. I'm a customer of Housatonic Waterworks. So I know the issues facing our town because I'm living through them right now. And I don't want to say that I have all the answers because I don't. But what I do have, I have the ability to talk to people, to listen, and to help create policies that I think the people of this town will actually want enacted. And I think that's what being a select board member is all about, right? I think it's having the right perspective and then also having the ability to be a collaborator with the public and with their fellow board members to actually bring those policies to life. So I'll just finish by saying I was raised in Great Barrington. I would be honored to give back by serving on the select board and helping this town move into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that. So I will open up for questions to the audience, but I'll just begin with just one question to both candidates. So I recall that either in your statements to the newsletter or just now, you've both mentioned Housatonic Waterworks. You only had 3 minutes in your opening statements. I want to give you now both a little bit more time to talk about the water situation in Housatonic, whether or not the town should be involved, and if so, what should they do? And well, maybe Ben, you want to go first, and then
Sure. Like I said, I live in Housatonic. I'm a Housatonic Waterworks customer. I know firsthand what it's like to live through this. You know, we're lucky enough we live in a part of Housatonic Village. We're on one of the newer mains, so our water's not that bad, but still, in the summertime, when the manganese levels rise, our water is a light brown color, and we have to give our daughter baths in that water. On top of that, we have to worry about it being, possibly giving her cancer. We can't live like this. The people of Housatonic can't live like this. So I'm dedicated to finding a solution to this crisis. I'm living it every day, and I will do right by the people of Housatonic. I think it is the town's job to step in. I think the only way forward to make sure that we actually have a sustainable solution to this that doesn't put the cost onto the ratepayers of Housatonic and the taxpayers of Great Barrington is to create a public utility. That way we can get grant money, and we can get government and federal funding to actually do the infrastructure work that we need to actually give water to the people of Houstonic that's safe and clean.
I don't live in Housatonic, but I've been an advocate because I think it's absolutely wrong that we've had this problem for years now. I wrote letters to the editor, and more recently, Denise Forbes, who does live in Housatonic, and I got together a ad hoc committee, if you will, to gather 1,200 signatures to send to the governor, the Mass DEP, TPU, all the select boards. There are 3 towns involved with using Housatonic water. Their boards of health, our legislators, and such, to really highlight the problem, the intensity of the problem. I've studied all the public companies that have bought out their private water suppliers, and I think I have a good fund of knowledge as to what goes on. I've talked to the Mass DEP for a long time, asking them why they do not extend themselves to enforce the violations and such. And they said, well, we really don't have enforcement capabilities. And I really called them on it. But I think that my expertise gathered through all this process will be helpful in finding solutions. Clearly, we would seek grants, and Senator Richard Neal has published some of the grants we would qualify for in buying a water utility, as well as loans. And certainly we would be in a favorable position to get lower interest rates and longer terms for the loans. It's a matter of how much and who can pay for this solution. Clearly, it's not going to be free. So we have to talk through all that, and I think being on the select board, and the select board's been working on it for quite some time. They've been supportive of having studies done, all of which I've read. So I think I'm prepared, but most of the talks have been behind closed doors. I would like to be inside those doors, doing complex problem solving, finding ways to finance the solution, and getting the town to support the solution. I do think it is a civic responsibility for all of us to have clean water. I also think that the Great Barrington people who don't use the water would find it very useful to have a backup system that we don't have now. We are drilling, buddy, you said we're drilling 35 feet now, so we must need some additional water. So hopefully we'll come up with a solution. It's gone on too long.
Thank you both. In the remaining 35 minutes, I'd like to turn this over to the audience for follow-up and additional questions. So would anyone like to begin with a question for the candidates? Please.
Hi, I'm Jenny Clark. For some, this is a difficult decision to make because we have a lot of need for young people to rise to the occasion and work here and be here and work on our committees, and we have also a very experienced candidate. So were you to not, I don't want to put you on the spot, but were you to not actually win this election, how can we see you working for the town in the future? I don't hear a lot of volunteer work in your past, but you've only just gotten here. So what could we look forward to?
Sure. Right now, you can see me as a member of the Housatonic Improvement Committee. I've been on that since last December. And like I said, I live in Housatonic and I'm dedicated to both finding solutions for our problems as well as promoting it as, I think, really a great place to invest in the future of all of Great Barrington. I think we can set the template for the future of that town with what we do with the projects in Housatonic. If I don't get this, you will see me at the Housatonic playground with my 2-year-old daughter because she takes up most of my time right now. And that's really how I get out into the community. But I'm not going anywhere, right? I'm living here. I'm going to raise my daughter here. Like I said, this is the town that I grew up in, and I'm going to raise her here as well. So I'll continue to be involved. I'll continue to go to town meetings where if issues arise. I will find opportunities to volunteer in the community. I will, if I have the free time, I will dedicate it to finding a solution to the Housatonic water crisis outside of the select board. I think there's a lot of advocacy that can be done to really make sure everyone in town knows that this is a town issue, and make sure that our representatives at the state and federal level are paying attention to it, and just keep the pressure on, because it's not going away unless we do something. Thank you.
Further questions?
James Harris. I'd like to ask the same question of Sharon. If in the event that you don't win, will you remain committed to the town, and in what way?
Well, I've been a citizen advocate for an awful long time since I stepped down, or did not run for finance committee. It's almost 10 years now. And in the interim, you can see that I've gone to all the Berkshire County Education Task Force meetings. I drove every 3 weeks to above Pittsfield to Dalton for a Saturday morning 3-hour meeting every 3 weeks for about 3.5 years, and by Zoom since then. Also, I've attended all of the 8 town, school consolidation meetings, and I've advocated for Great Barrington when we were discussing what the assessment method should be. I was right there. I'm not a committee member, but they always give me citizen speak time, and I speak my mind. So I'll continue on that. The clean water is absolutely important, but I won't have as much information on it. I would like to, even as a citizen, advocate for a new master plan. One of the things that is a major issue, which Ben really touched upon, is the affordable housing issues and such. I just got the report from our town manager, Mark Prohensky, and it was astounding what Great Barrington has done so far. If we have all the affordable housing that has been approved or planned, we will have 4 times the amount of people in affordable housing, not including 1 and 2 family units. So that's a lot. That's 15% of our current population. Now, much of affordable housing is tax advantaged. That means we don't collect the taxes in proportion to the new population. So who will be absorbing that will be the taxpayers. We have to decide how much we want to have as affordable housing. As I mentioned, it's 15% if all those projects are completed. Of our total population. Do we want 25%, 40%? And then how much will we plan for? I mean, certainly the additional services, police, DPW, even the school will increase. So we need a balance of all the things that we want to do.
Following up on that, I heard mention of affordable housing. Is affordable childcare an issue? And is it as important as affordable housing for both candidates?
gladly go first.
And as important also means money, like town funds, and we know there's only so much of that to go around.
I 100% believe that it is. Massachusetts has some of the most expensive rents in the country, as well as some of the most expensive childcare costs. And I can tell you, it is a barrier to entering the workforce and to getting your career off the ground if you are trying to raise a family at the same time that you're trying to get set in your career. Those first 5 years, kids take a lot of work, you know? And I think it's a critical part of our economy and of our just general social infrastructure to make sure that we are doing everything we can to bring childcare to this town. I think that involves creating, tax incentives for people to open up new childcare businesses in town, and expanding grant access to make sure that tuition is affordable for residents of the town.
Well, studies have shown that the lack of Housatonic childcare is much more severe than Great Barrington Central. And I was hoping that the Housatonic School would be a possible place for a childcare facility. The school was closed in 2004, and it's taken us all this time to 2003 to determine and attract an investor. Some of that was that we've gone through, the end of the recession, the Great Recession, and we've had COVID and so forth. So I'm not trying to be critical, but we have to look at maybe some of the central buildings, and there are not too many left. Ramsdale is one, which could be a community center. I don't know if it can be part of the child care facility, but someplace in the center of town, if we had a town-funded facility, that would attract people who would be able to provide the services that especially Housatonic needs. So I'm all in favor of that. I would encourage those who need it to advocate for it loudly, to attend the select board meetings, to do things like I've done, had ad hoc committees for them. I shouldn't call it committees because those are, you can have a special meaning in the town. Ad hoc task force. That's what we did for the last several years with Housatonic water. I mean, they were saying in Mass DEP, well, we don't get complaints. People got tired of it, so they just stopped doing it and lived with it. But that wasn't right. For everything, we need to have people who explain what we need and why, and come up with ideas that, for example, the select board could vote on, or the planning board.
And just really quickly, one very brief follow-up to that. To both candidates, what would you say to a second homeowner who says, why should my tax dollars be going to fund childcare for the town? Isn't that supposed to be a state issue, a federal issue? Why are you asking me to pay for that?
I would say, don't think of it as a childcare tax. Think of it as a labor tax. Because all of the work that we need to do to make this town affordable for families is to make sure that the bedrock of our economy is sound, right? We need to make sure that the families who are actually working in this town can afford to live here and work here. And especially if you go downtown to all of the shops and restaurants that we love so much that kind of, in our minds make up Great Barrington, look at the labor force there. It's mostly teenagers. It's mostly kids who are growing up in this town. And if we don't create the ability for families to raise those kids in our town, we're going to lose that labor force.
I say it's an economic development expenditure. I've studied the demographics for Housatonic. We have a disproportionate large under 5 population and workforce population, 28 to 45 or something. And if we have a problem with childcare, which we do, then it's an economic development issue. People are constrained, as you say, from working. It's just a matter of fact. And I think economic development should be a major priority for Great Barrington. All that's happened in the last 3 to 5 years has changed Great Barrington a great deal. The housing market is gone through the roof. Costs, people have moved. We don't even know. In my neighborhood, the change of house ownership has been tremendous. So I think, again, I advocate for a new master plan, whether I'm as a select board member or not, and those things like housing and childcare should be part of it. It all will cost money, definitely, but we're going to lose a great deal if we don't take matters into our hands and find a balance for where our priorities are and how much money we want to spend. We can't just let these things happen and let it be addressed in the year-to-year budget cycle. Oh, why do we need so many police people? Because blah, blah, blah. Why are we spending money on this? If we have a master plan, and I read it a lot, I study the demographics and so forth, it will help to guide us and give us confidence that where we're spending money is what we wanted to do in an integrated manner.
Thank you both. At this point, I'll pause. Are there any further questions from the audience? Anyone who'd like to come up and ask a question? Please.
Good evening. I'm Alan Inglis, and I have a very simple, open-ended question for both of you, of course, and it has to do with your specific views on the controversy that has swirled around the airport, as well as what you see as its future. That's that. Thank you.
You want me to go?
Sure.
Shall I?
I think it's up to you.
You can sit down.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm for the airport. I don't want to see it closed. It breaks my heart that we've had such controversy. My original issues have to do with safety for our water supply. And I'm happy to see that the Board of Health is wanting to have regular testing to ensure that it is our main water supply. And we talk about Housatonic water. Well, how about our own water source? Buddy, you've told me we're drilling 35 feet for GBFD, and so I am concerned. But, there are all these issues, and I'll tell you, the litigants wanted me to write a letter of support because of my concern with water. And I said, no, I think you should compromise. And I didn't hear from them again. So I think the Select Board has done a good job to sort through the issues, been very patient to hear all the views. And I hope that, it's not perfect, but I hope all these issues that are raised will have a positive means of resolution. Should we have, I do feel that we should have some limitations on the noise and the number of flights and so forth, but, and I know it is a critical resource for emergency care, and I've used the airport several times, so I don't want it closed, but I think there's a mechanism, and there was great research in the Berkshire Edge on elaborating on all of the issues. So hopefully an informed audience and an informed select board will work through those issues.
Yeah. I agree, I think, with your general idea. Airport is an incredibly important institution in this town, and it's been part of this town, I'm gonna guess, longer than any of us have been alive. I don't know everyone's age, obviously. I'm glad it went through the special permit process. I think it's important to make sure that it's following the same rules that we set out, for every business in this town, and that it's being a good neighbor to the people in the community. And I know it's not over, but I think the select board did what it needed to do on this issue.
Hearing a follow-up question? Please, if you want, you can say it and I'll repeat it. Or you're going to come up.
I have a follow-up question about the airport. As someone reading the Berkshire Eagle and the Berkshire Edge, I've been quite confused about it. There were so many hearings, but at the end, I got a lot more clarity when I read Ed Abraham's statement that Eileen Mooney posted in her newsletter recently. And it mystifies me why only Ed voted against that, and why, because, it seems like 4 members of the 5 on the Board of Selectmen chose to ignore the town attorney's caution to them that by passing the restrictions that they passed, that they were basically unenforceable and that they were giving away the store illegally. I asked Ed earlier today on the phone, since I wasn't there to hear everybody speak at their last meeting, what did the other selectmen say why they didn't vote? They voted to pass these rather meaningless sounding stipulations. And he said that no one else made a public statement about it. I want to know if you two have read Ed's detailed statement, and if so, what you think of what he said. And if you didn't, what do you think of the town attorney's caution that the select board was giving away important future legal room?
Well, I can start if you want. I read Ed's statement, and I agree with a lot of what he said. But I also think there's not a perfect solution, and I guess after all of the hearings dealing with the 1930s issue, that, years ago when the airport first applied, I think they wanted a restaurant and they wanted expansion and so forth. And I sat into one of the select board meetings where they wanted to have a 12-hour party. And fortunately, Steve Bannon cut the hours down somewhat because he didn't want to squash it, but he needed to put it in perspective so that it's not, unlimited. I think I have the confidence that much more knowledge has been shared, and the select board would be, a lot of things aren't enforceable. We don't have a police force that's going to, monitor absolutely every infraction. From the Division Street Bridge that we have trucks going through all the time that are over the limit. But there has to be some amount of trust. And I think that both sides, the town and the airport, have come to a place where they respect each other. And I'm hoping that that's true.
I agree with a lot of that. I unfortunately have not had the chance to read Ed's letter yet. But I would say that, I think I know where he's coming from, but I also think I understand where the other 4 members of the board were coming from. That it's kind of like Sharon said, there's no perfect solution to this. And I imagine, they knew that as they voted on this, and that we'll, whether or not this is enforceable, we'll find out. Like, this is the process, right? We're going to work through it. The airport came, it's a start, it's making its way through land court right now, so we'll find out exactly, how effective this is. I think the board did what it had to do, and I think it did what it had to do to support the airport.
Thank you. I'm still not enlightened. I think to go against your own town attorney's advice, that you, as a board of selectmen, you're narrowing your future powers by putting in stipulations that look like they're going to do something to address the issues raised by the upset neighbors of the airport. If I were on the select board, which I don't ever plan to be, it's a grueling job, I wouldn't want to go against the town attorney's advice. What are we paying him for? To go against, essentially go against his advice.
I mean, I think that's the nature of advice, that you don't always have to take it.
And one thing I was comforted with is that this ruling goes with the airport, not with the land. Is that right, Steve?
Yes. All right, thank you.
Thank you for that discussion. I appreciate it. May need your help. Would like to wrap up in about 10 minutes, and if you'll permit me, I'd like to introduce a new topic. So this one's kind of complex, but I'll keep the question simple. School consolidation. There is a proposal about a year old now to combine Berkshire Hills Regional School District with Southern Berkshire Regional School District, keeping the outlying schools intact, but merging the 2 high schools. Are you for this, against it? What do you think? I'd like to hear from both candidates.
I'm definitely for it. As I said, I've been following it since I stepped down from the Finance Committee. I really wanted to have the county support, really South County support of our financing, especially the high school, which is a very costly thing. We had the highest tax rate, and it's driven by the school assessment, because we're supplementing all the choice in, and for that matter, the tuition in students too. Well, it's not really their fault, but it was a massive amount of work to change it. And the only way we could really solve the problem is not to keep raising the prices or go to the state and say, why do you only give us $5,000 for choice in students and so forth? It is to consolidate the district. And as you might have read, I went to years of trouble to try to get the number of high school students from the various towns, and that wasn't just the other 5 towns in Southern Berkshire Regional School District, but they came from Pittsfield, they came from, Lanesboro, all over. And so how could we build a school and finance all it's not just the capital costs, but the operating costs is like 90% of the expense of running the school. I mean, every year we were having to the school had to plead for, don't cut the arts program, don't cut the music program, and so forth. Basically, we didn't have enough financing. So I have slogged through these 7 years and 3 years with the school consolidation, and especially sitting in on the finance committee, the discussions on how we should allocate the operating costs, how we should allocate the capital costs. People were outraged. Why do we have to pay 90% of the building costs? Well, Southern Berkshires has a big debt as well. They're going to have to pay for theirs, and same 90-10. And the New Marlboro School needs serious renovation. The 5 towns will pay for that, and anything that the Egremont School will need. So we try to balance. I mean, it's all a compromise. So I am also concerned that we get the best of both worlds. Southern Berkshires has some wonderful programs, the robotics programs and the follow-up of a number of other science programs. I'm hoping that we get a broader stream of educational choices for all the students. So I hope people will be involved with those discussions. When I went to the community meeting at here, some of the Southern Berkshire people said, should we assume that we're going to have to follow what Berkshire Hills has for the high school program, the personnel and so forth? I said, no, their whole, the new committee will be made up of 3 people from Great Barrington, 2 people from Sheffield, and 1 representative for every other town. So there are going to be 11 people. And they will decide on the education programs, the superintendent, and everything else. So I hope people will start thinking about who will be the best representative for this grander scheme of things. It's a very complex set of activities. The traveling, the finances, the new school committee operations. So be involved.
And Ben, what do you think?
Sure. I agree with a lot of what Sharon just said. I think the merger of the 2 districts is not only necessary, but I think it's inevitable. That we just don't have the number of students to sustain both of these districts for a lot of the reasons that we've been discussing tonight, of just how hard it is to raise a family in this area. I'm also just kind of excited about this process because I think it's a real opportunity to really examine what education in this town and in this district looks like. That finding ways to make sure that we're teaching different kids the way they need to be taught and giving them the course offerings to actually pique their interest and get them on a track they need for their future. I think it's a good opportunity to address the way we pay our taxes to the school district. I do think we're paying more than our fair share, and we should address that. And I think it's the job of the select board to come out in favor of that. And so I just want to make sure that we're all paying our fair share.
It'll get better.
A really quick follow-up. So maybe just 1 minute each. So what do you say to someone from Sheffield who says, look, we've got a perfectly good school building. What's our motivation to merge districts and then bus our children to a school building that needs to be replaced?
Look at the one of the main reports on 8towns.org. You'll see on page 20, there's a map of where the students are coming from all over the county. And you will also see that Monument is at the central location of these students. So is it the cost of the building to use a perfectly good building, but have people travel, the students travel further because it's in the southwest corner of the county? Or is it to really come up with a centralized school that serves the real population that's attending the school?
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of that. It's, I think, the benefit of having an actual, like enough students to truly have a real culture in the schools is really important. I know as someone who has grew up here and had a graduating class of about 120 and has moved out, that you're often looked at with a very odd look when you tell people that you come from a school that small. So I think there's a lot of benefit of bringing them together. And I also think that if you look at the numbers in Southern County, that they just don't have the numbers to kind of sustain a quality education moving forward, and that it's in the best interest for everybody to come together.
Well, can I say one more thing? Sure. What I do like about Southern Berkshires is that they have, they address, I don't know, what is it, counseling and guiding people in multiple pathways. And I'm hoping that that mindset will help to inform us to support a wide range of students that we will ultimately have, and I really do hope this all happens. I think the meeting on next Wednesdays, anyway, within the next week will happen where the committee will make a recommendation, and it'll be September, October when all the towns, 8 towns, vote on the consolidation. So it's coming up, so please keep informed.
Thank you. As we're closing, I'd like to give you both 2 minutes to close, and one question I have for you to think about during your closing statement. Is there an issue, a topic that hasn't been brought up tonight that you would like to address? If so, please do so.
I would say one issue that we haven't talked about tonight that I think is pretty important is pedestrian safety in town and in Houstonic Village Center. I know it's gone up for a vote and the board has made a decision, but I think it's an issue that needs to be reopened and relooked at, because I don't think any solution that doesn't directly address the blind spot on Main Street isn't an actual solution. I don't think that, I'm speaking from experience as someone who has a small child that I've walked in a stroller, and twice last summer came within inches of getting hit by a car who didn't see me coming in that center lane. I think working on pedestrian safety and also expanding just transportation issues throughout town and the county, as well as expanding our bike lanes and sidewalk networks are incredibly important, both to help us become less car dependent, which I think is an environmental goal that we should move forward as a town, and giving people resources, people who don't have cars, a safe way to get to the places they need to go. And just, I guess, thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate the chance to get out and meet so many of you. I hope you'll approach me if you have any more questions after. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. I absolutely agree with you on the transportation issue. That's long, in coming, and I guess Americans love their cars, but we need transportation alternatives, whether it's in town, east-west, north-south. North-south is being addressed, through Passaic and such, but we don't have a way to get from Passaic to Great Barrington. In terms of other issues, I think short-term rentals continues to be an issue. I say the sense of community is the most important asset that I can think of in Great Barrington. Short-term rentals absolutely impede and sometimes destroy this. People tell me story after story. There is we voted last year 2-1 to support some limitations on short-term rentals. But the citizen petitions of 39, 40, and 41 absolutely hollow out that bylaw that we passed. So I hope people will reject it. I argue that as vehemently as I did at last year's town meeting. In summary, I've been a long advocate, citizen advocate, as well as on the Finance Committee for Great Barrington. That's why I go to all those silly, not silly, but arduous, meetings for the school district. I argue the allocation of the school district. They say, oh, we can't have those 7 towns, increase their assessment too much. And I said, over my dead body, we have been supporting South County and beyond for such a long time. You must give us an opportunity to have some relief when we are doing so much leadership. Anyway, we need to have good ideas for being on a select board, but we also need to do the arduous work of attending all the meetings, doing the readings, the visits. It's a big responsibility, and I think I have the experience and the marks to sustain good representation for Great Barrington. I know we both love Great Barrington, so I hope you'll vote for me.
Thank you so much to Sharon and Ben. Thank you so much to all of the candidates. Thank you to everyone who puts themselves forward to serve. Drive safe and remember to go vote.